Are the Falcons about to do the unthinkable and take a running back in the first round? Well, guys, we're going to talk about why and how the Falcons drafting Bijan Robinson actually makes sense.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, and of course, the very humble host that never in his life has ever predicted the Falcons to take a running back in the first round of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day, always cracking myself up every day on this illustrious podcast. And make sure you follow for free so that you can have your laughs too on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we're starting off the conversation talking about Bijan Robinson. We're going to spend the rest of the day talking with other folks about other running backs beyond Bijan Robinson that they like. Saivion Mixson of Blogging Dirty and the New Millennium Falcons podcast. We'll also be talking with Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio as well about some running backs that are not named Bijan Robinson that could help the Falcons out at this position. But let's start talking about Bijan Robinson. And, you know, even though I've always thought the idea of the Falcons taking Bijan Robinson was very plausible and a very possible outcome, I've always been, to a certain extent, skeptical that ultimately, when push came to shove, the Falcons would pull the trigger on Bijan Robinson at the top of the 2023 draft. You know, I always thought, you know, defensive player, an offensive lineman, if they're available at 8, you know, taking Bijan Robinson becomes a lot less likely. I've always kind of put a number between like 10 and 20% in terms of the possibility, the chances of the Falcons taking Bijan Robinson, but it seems like those odds are going up based off of outside factors. But to me, the case for why I've always thought Bijan Robinson was a plausible pick for the Falcons was because it would truly be the test for whether or not this team, when they say we take the best player available, they truly mean we're going to take the best player available, right? Because I've compiled 21 draft boards from across the internet to come up with sort of consensus rankings, and Bijan Robinson is the 4th highest ranked player on that consensus draft board. He's ranked higher across these draft boards over CJ Stroud, Christian Gonzalez, Tyree Wilson, Peter Skoronski, Devin Witherspoon. And because we know historically the Falcons, at least in the early rounds, haven't strayed too far from the consensus in terms of who they've liked with these top 10 picks the last couple of drafts, it's very plausible that the Falcons could see rank Bijan Robinson over some of those other players that may or may not be available with that 8th overall pick. And as I said, there's been a lot of recent buzz that puts Bijan Robinson as the favorite pick, right? You go to FanDuel, you know, official partner of the NFL and official sports book of the Locked On Network. For the last week, Bijan has been the front runner to be the number 8 overall pick, right? There was a couple of days there over the weekend where Nolan Smith kind of overtook him, but Bijan is back in the front runner. You have both Peter King, you have Albert Breer in their mocks earlier this week project him to the Falcons with the 8th overall selection. And according to our good buddy Myles Garrett, you know, Peter King's final mock that he's put out the last 3 years has nailed the Falcons pick, right? And both King, both Breer mention the possibility that the Falcons are wanting to move back, and it makes sense, right? For the Falcons, if they're going to take a player like Bijan Robinson, to move back 3 spots, 5 spots, possibly 8 spots or more, and still probably be in a position to take Bijan Robinson, especially if a team wants to come up for a quarterback. And there's been more talk over the last couple of days that, you know, these quarterbacks are sliding down the board, a CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson, a Will Levis. We shall see. And if one of those teams comes up for a quarterback, the Falcons can move back and be comfortable, maybe not safe, with the idea that Bijan Robinson will still be there in the middle of the first round. When you look at the teams other than the Falcons, Philadelphia is probably the only team that realistically could take him at 10. And pretty much everybody who covers the Philadelphia Eagles does not believe that Howie Roseman, the Eagles general manager, will actually veer from his rules and take a running back in the first round. And so it's been decreasing buzz over the last few weeks that Bijan Robinson is actually in play for the Eagles at 10. But let's talk about Bijan Robinson, the player. And what do you need to hear from me about Bijan Robinson? I've long said on Twitter and on this podcast, there are two types of people in the world, right? There are Bijan Robinson fans and all the people that haven't watched him yet, right? And I asked to all of you guys in the comments and elsewhere, how long did it take for you to sit down and watch Bijan Robinson before you realized he was good, right? I don't have to sell you on Bijan Robinson as a football player because it's so blatantly obvious how good a football player he is. He's a complete running back. He has the speed, the power, the quickness, the balance, the burst, the vision. He can catch, he can block, he can do it all, right? And depending on who you talk to, he can do it all better than any running back we've seen in the last 5 years since Saquon Barkley, since any running back we've seen in over 15 years since Adrian Peterson, right? But we all know he's a running back, and teams don't draft running backs in the first round, let alone draft running backs in the top 10, top 15 picks. And the analytics nerds are correct, right? We're a fan of analytics here on this podcast, but we don't take it so far to believe that basically, running backs don't matter, as some people are out there putting it. But they're absolutely right. All the data tells you that taking a running back high in the draft is a suboptimal pick, and it's based off of the idea that this is a passing league, and the things that help you win the most are things that help you pass or things that prevent your opponent from passing. So that's why quarterback, left tackle, wide receiver, pass rusher, cornerback are the premium positions that teams invest in, that teams overwhelmingly, I think the number is like 70% of the time, our top 10 picks come from those 5 positions, right? And it's understandable, and I can't defend it. I can't defend the idea of taking a running back as, hey, this is worthwhile, other than there are exceptions to every rule. And I think Arthur Smith is the type of coach, and we'll see if Terry Fontenot is the type of general manager, being all sneaky and stuff. But Arthur Smith is the type of coach that, he'll probably just say analytics be damned, right? We're not trying to play fantasy football here, right? We're trying to win football games. And I think he'll look at Bijan Robinson in the same way that he looked at Derrick Henry, right? As that force in their offense that can provide stability, that can be the foundation of your offense. And it goes back to a conversation we had back in June of 2021 after the Falcons traded Julio Jones. And I talked about what was the thing that the Falcons were losing the most in Julio Jones was that foundational player. Longtime listeners of this podcast know that I've often referred to Julio Jones during his time here in Atlanta as the sun, meaning, the sun holds 99% of the gravity in the solar system. Julio Jones holds the gravity that he keeps all the planets rotating, right? In the Falcons offense. That's the player that every single Sunday when teams line up, we have to stop him, right? And if you're the Falcons and you sit here and say, this is the foundation of our offense, this is the player that we run our offense through, and you can't find great offenses in the league that don't have at least one skill position player that is that foundational piece, right? And when we drafted Kyle Pitts, a lot of people thought Kyle Pitts would be that guy, and Kyle Pitts may very well be that guy, but he hasn't been that guy yet. Some people will continue to hold that against them because they're still butthurt that the Falcons took a player that they thought they should have taken at 4 in that 2021 draft. But I don't hold it against Kyle Pitts, right? Because like you look at Travis Kelce, the tight end that would be the equivalent of the sun for the Kansas City Chiefs offense, as he has often been over the last 5 to 7 years. And Travis Kelce didn't become that player until his 4th year in the NFL when he was 27 years old. So I look at a player like Kyle Pitts, and I don't think he has to be that guy at the age of 22 quite yet. Obviously I want him to be, but if he's not that guy, that's not something that I'm going to hold it against him. But in the case of a player like Bijan Robinson, he can be that sun, right? He can be that foundational piece that you say, we got to stop him, just like teams said when Arthur Smith was in Tennessee with Derrick Henry. And I also think, he can also put some butts in the seats, because I recall some Falcon fans, our favorite Desmond Ritter hater, Crackerjack19 on Twitter, had a Twitter space a couple of weeks ago, back in March, talking about the marketability of the Falcons and needing that marketable player. And they were talking about the quarterback. That was when the whole Lamar Jackson, will they, won't they stuff was going on. And I didn't listen to the full space, because at a certain point, people started talking about, we should have taken George Pickens in the draft. And my eyes immediately glaze over anytime someone starts playing revisionist history about, who we should have taken in a draft in previous years. Cause I'm just like, unless you have a time machine, this is a boring conversation. But that's just my own personal hill to die on. But it was notable to me that I thought there were some poignant things said about the type of team that Arthur Smith wants to build, the type of identity that he wants to have here in Atlanta. He wants a team that is more about, toughness and grit and physicality than necessarily one star player that you can, especially at the quarterback position, that you can put on the pedestal and like the entire team revolves around him. And I think Bijan Robinson embodies that type of player that I think Arthur Smith and company may be looking for here in Atlanta, right? Because we'll have a bunch of fans complaining about, oh, you can't take a running back in the first round, blah, 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 blah. But, when Sunday comes, people are going to be lining up in the streets to go watch that running back play on football if he winds up living up to all the hype that he has going for him. And I think, Bijan Robinson can be that sort of marketable centerpiece star here for the Atlanta Falcons. And I don't think he's alone in terms of fitting that archetype in this draft, but I do think the Falcons are about getting tough, physical, hard-nosed football players, and I think Bijan Robinson makes a lot of sense for that reason. We'll ultimately see if the Falcons pull the trigger on him at 8 or they go in a different direction. Do the Falcons move back and try to take him later in the draft? We'll have to sort of see. We're counting down the hours right now at this point in terms of when that will happen, but we'll move the conversation beyond Bijan Robinson, although we'll talk a little bit more about Bijan Robinson with our next guest, Saivion Mixson of Blogging Dirty in the New Millennium Falcons podcast. He'll talk about Bijan and why he likes Bijan here in Atlanta, because he's been pushing the Bijan train pretty hard as well. And he'll also talk about some later round running backs that he also likes as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, guys. But before we get there, I do want to tell you guys what's in store for you here on the Locked On Podcast Network on Thursday night during the draft. Join Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino, the two draft dudes, as well as other Locked On NFL experts. Myself probably will stop by at some point for their live NFL draft coverage presented by Ultimate Football GM. Starts Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. They'll be covering not only rounds 1, rounds 2 and 3 through Friday night. And then, of course, Saturday, giving you some recaps after each round. So join the draft dudes for the first round on Thursday night, live on YouTube, as well as the Locked On NFL scouting page at 7:30 Eastern time. So, guys, if you're looking for a delicious snack and you don't want to have to deal with all the sugar and calories, that come with it, well, I have the perfect snack for you. It's Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. And the thing that makes Built Bar so delicious is that it's covered in 100% real chocolate. They're low in sugar, calories, but they have a whopping 17 grams of protein. They come in great flavors like churro and peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, cookies and cream. They just dropped their peanut butter puff flavor. That's what they were hyping up over the last couple of days. So go ahead and get yourself a box by heading over to built.com, ordering yourself a box. Use the promo code LOCKEDON15. You'll get 15% off your order. But not only can you go to built.com to check out the peanut butter puff, you can get the same great flavors that you want at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. Walk to Walmart, go to the pharmacy section, grab yourself a 4-bar box of cookies and cream or double chocolate. Head to Sam's, run in and grab a 13-bar box of brownie batter puff or churro. You will thank me later. So wrapping up here with Saivion Mixson, you can find his stuff at New Millennium Falcons and, of course, Blogging Dirty. Saivion, let's talk about the running back position. Who you got for me?
So, of course, this wouldn't be the Locked On Falcons podcast without talking about Bijan Robinson a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, kind of have to.
Mm-hmm.
Huge. I mean, just huge, explosive guy. He's just not a regular running back prospect. And I think that seeing guys like Bill Barnwell and all these types of guys that are kind of against, using that 8 pick against for a running back. I don't. The value's there because he's a slot. He basically could be a slot receiver, an outside receiver. He's a matchup nightmare. And just picturing a bunch formation with him, London, and Pitts, just I can't get it out of my head now that it's in there.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about Locked On Falcons, pushing the Bijan agenda. It feels like you've kind of overtaken me over the last couple of weeks on pushing that Bijan agenda.
100%. And if you need me to take the reins just fully, I will. If that's the case.
All right.
I mean, the vision is too nice. It is. And if you love, I know we say that we love Tyler Algier, but you don't want to. This is obviously a run-oriented offense. You don't want to run him into the ground. Best way to not run him into the ground is to get him the best running mate known in this draft right now. So it just makes sense to me.
Yes, definitely. Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb sort of combination between those two guys with Bijan and Tyler Algier, and certainly we saw that combination be kind of the guiding principle to leading the Browns to the postseason a couple of years ago when they didn't necessarily have elite quarterback play from Baker Mayfield. And so I do think that is something that the Falcons can borrow a page from. Obviously, it didn't work out for Baker Mayfield long-term in Cleveland. Obviously, we would hope things would go a little bit differently for Desmond Ridder here in Atlanta. But certainly, I think it would, improving that running game, I think certainly would elevate the floor for the Atlanta Falcons. But I imagine, Saivion, Bijan isn't the only player that you have your eye on that could help provide that, right?
It is not. Also, like Kenny McIntosh, got to talk with him a little bit at the Senior Bowl. Great guy, Florida guy, which is obviously going to bring me into the fold. But just what he brings to the passing game, solid runner, solid vision, and I mean he's just an all-around athlete, versatile athlete that you can put into this offense, and Arthur Smith can be able to use. I mean, we're giving Arthur Smith and Desmond Ridder all these weapons. Something's good's going to happen at some point.
Yeah, I agree with that. Kenny McIntosh, continues a long line of very successful Georgia running backs making the leap to the NFL. We just mentioned Nick Chubb. So, I'm not sure he's going to be on Nick Chubb's level, but certainly I think he's a guy that in the James Cook, DeAndre Swift, is that a fair sort of tier for Kenny McIntosh?
I like James Cook the most because I think that's kind of the blueprint of what you're getting from Kenny McIntosh.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Any other running backs you got for us?
One last one is Evan Hull from Northwestern. I talked with him at the Senior Bowl as well, and I asked him swiftly, is a hot dog a sandwich? I did, and he gave me the most thorough answer as to why it is not a sandwich. And I was like, I may have to reconsider my stance on this. And it's just he's a smart guy, downhill runner, almost exactly what you get from Tyler Algier. So let's say you want to give Tyler Algier a break and you don't want to get let up on the defense, on third down or when the game's starting to get close in the fourth, you can just bring Evan Hull in and you get similar, maybe not as explosive, but similar production.
Yeah, I just learned an interesting fact yesterday that Northwestern only won one game this past year, and I was just like, how? Yep. Like they have all these good players on their team. Obviously I'm not dialed into college football as much as I should be. Learning that, in early April when that was established in December. But I was just like, okay, apparently just some parts of Northwestern were downright terrible this past year, but Evan Hull was not one of them is the point I'm trying to make here. So yeah, definitely a good player. And certainly I think a guy probably in that, 5th, 6th round range you sort of you see him go earlier than that?
It definitely looks about 5th or 6th, just with how many running backs are in this class. He might be one of those that falls, and it's like, oh, look at this that I found. Kind of like how Algier did. So it just very much following the Algier mold.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Well, Saivion, are there any other players that you would like to see the Falcons, target? You have the floor. So if you want to push any agenda, now is the time.
I am pushing the Bryce Ford-Wheaton agenda wholeheartedly. Brugler had him as a seventh round guy, and I think that is a travesty. But I also understand because he's not exactly the most refined of route runners, but he does have that long stride that eats up ground really quickly. So let's say you just feel like getting another athlete and just throwing a dart on day 3. I think Bryce Ford-Wheaton is the perfect guy for that. Insane athlete, tested out extremely well at the combine. It's just he's another guy that I would be like, yeah, I'll go ahead and take a flyer on him.
Wide receiver from West Virginia, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right.
Yes, sir. Only thing is he can't be the first one to wear 0. That's the only thing, because he's too raw to do. He's too raw of a prospect to do that.
Well, I mean, now the Falcons have to take Christian Gonzalez just to get him to wear 0, right?
I mean, it just makes sense.
Yeah,
it just makes sense.
So, speaking of Christian Gonzalez, since I have you here, we got a few minutes. What did you think of the Okudah trade?
So, I'm excited because I love getting guys that, this is definitely a reclamation project just overall. And then seeing Steve Weiss say this shouldn't take us out of the cornerback discussion at 8, which makes me happy because it's like, that's just depth. That's just plain depth. If we do go, yeah, we get Okudah, cool, but then we also get Christian Gonzalez or Devin Witherspoon. Big Devin Witherspoon guy. Got to talk to you about that. But if we do so happen to get Christian Gonzalez after getting Jeffrey Okudah, I mean, that's just depth. That's just receiver. I mean, corner after corner that we can just keep on the field. And there's no drop off in talent or in production, in my opinion. It's an amazing time to be an Atlanta Falcons fan. I'll say that.
All right. Yeah, we'll leave it on that note. That's a positive note to leave it. It's an amazing time to be an Atlanta Falcons fan. That statement has not been said that often on this podcast over the last couple of years. We'll leave it at that. Let the people know where they can find your stuff if they want to continue to read your insights into this draft class as well as other things on the Atlanta Falcons.
Yes, if you want optimistic takes on the Atlanta Falcons, I am found here at Mixon S, MIXSON S_NFL. I write for Around the Block Network, atbnetwork.com. Do a wonderful podcast with great guys, the New Millennium Falcons podcast, and just started working over at bloggingdirty.com. So, yeah, go ahead and find me wherever.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get Fleek on just to complete the set for the New Millennium Falcons. Yeah, so, yeah. I'll reach out to him in the next couple of weeks to see what that's about. So, because Hunter and Trayshawn were on during the Senior Bowl. If you guys don't know the rest of that group, so go check out that episode with Hunter Thompson and Trayshawn Diaz, and of course check out their stuff, New Millennium Falcons. Check out Saivion stuff at Blog and Dirty. Saivion, again, I really appreciate you coming on, and look forward to seeing if the Falcons target some of these guys, and we'll have to have you on post draft to sing the praises of maybe one or two of these guys if the Falcons wind up landing them.
That sounds like a plan. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. So, guys, we have more to come on today's episode from our second guest, Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. And he's going to give his thoughts on Tyler Algier and how and why he outperformed expectations, because you guys may recall we had Matt on the podcast last year after the draft, and he was skeptical of Tyler Algier as well as myself. And we'll talk about that. And we'll also talk about, the consensus RB2, right, in Jahmyr Gibbs, and why he might be a better complement to Tyler Algier than necessarily a Bijan Robinson, as well as some other options in the middle and late rounds at the running back position. But guys, in addition to the live show from the Draft Dudes that you guys can check out on Thursday and Friday, we'll probably also be doing a live show in the lead up to the Locked On NFL scouting coverage on YouTube and elsewhere. You can check out the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel for probably a live show. We'll right now tentatively thinking it's going to be about 7 p.m. Eastern time, which will lead you into Joe and Kyle's coverage. And then after the round one, so roughly around midnight Eastern time, we'll do a live reaction breaking down night one of the draft, and that will obviously go out to all the audio platforms. But of course, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get that action. So I'm here with Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, which you guys can make sure you buy it at mattwaldmanrsp.com. Trust me, it is worth your time. Lots of great information on the various players, quarterback, running back, receiver, etc., in this upcoming draft class. And as well, you get great breakdowns from post-draft once Matt knows where the players go. So you definitely want to get that update on that. But Matt, I know you were not necessarily the highest on Tyler Algier last year. I was not the highest on Tyler Algier last year for similar reasons that you had with him. But, we're a year later. We saw him have a very productive rookie season. What were some of the things that you saw from Tyler Algier in his rookie season that impressed you?
Well, first of all, the contact balance was a little better than what I saw at BYU. Watching him be able to take on defensive linemen and defensive ends head on and win some of those collisions were things that I didn't see him do at BYU with the viewings, and I watch a lot of tape of these guys. Didn't really see that. So that was good. Also, one of the things that I noted about him was that he is, while he played a lot of zone, that I thought he'd be more of a gap style player, better gap style player in the NFL. And when you look at what Atlanta did with him, while they did run some, off tackle zone with him, they ran a lot of toss. They ran a lot of plays outside with him. They didn't ask him to cut back too much. And when he did, he didn't always cut back into the best spots. But what he did so well was when you gave him that space, tell him basically what line to hit, he could maintain that line. He could break the first or second tackle. And I got to give Atlanta a lot of credit because on those plays, they were able to really create enough space for him that if you couldn't get a good angle on Algier, he was going to get it into the secondary. And while not the fastest guy, he reminded me of kind of a middle-class version of Spencer Ware, the former running back with the Chiefs, who is a little bit niftier, had a little bit better movement, but very powerful like Algier. So Algier did a great job being a hammer in this offense. And obviously he's always been a good pass catcher. So you got a little bit of that, involved too. But I'd say that Atlanta did a good job watching, going back this morning and watching like the Ravens game, the Saints game, watching the Steelers and seeing what he did against those units. I was impressed with overall the execution of both Algier and the line on perimeter plays. He did really his best work came off tackle or outside tackle, in that range. And though he could run, obviously ran well inside the red zone. And if you had him, working behind maybe a lead blocker, that was really good too. But to me, I think he's a good addition for the team. He did well. I think when I look back on my evaluation, I still probably would have him in the realm of, I probably might have him a couple, maybe a tier higher than I did. But I wouldn't have probably put him much further, even though his production was strong. You look at Atlanta and you look at the league. The league ran more than it has really, or more effectively than it has any time in the past 10 years. You look at Michael Lopez, who's the head stat researcher for the NFL, and he noted that after the first month. And it was easy to see what teams were doing because all these college, the influence of college offenses being in the NFL, the spread, and then defenses deciding they're going to play a lot more cover two and kind of put a governor on the vertical game, and then having these safeties disguised as linebackers playing in the box. Offenses finally looked around and said, look, we we now have the advantage to run gap plays that we can't usually run. We couldn't run in the NFL with the same efficiency unless we had great athletes on the offensive line. Now we have the size advantage to do this, and kind of this, and an advantage to be able to win this way. So you saw a lot more counter, a lot more power, a lot more toss, a lot more ISO than you've seen in the league. And so I think the league's getting bigger on offense, and with the influx of tight ends that I'm sure you guys will talk about down the line. With this tight end class, there's a possibility that we'll see that for another 3 to 4 years as college offenses, or college defenses are still putting out these Isaiah Simmons, Deion Buchanan linebacker types who are really safety size players. And the NFL offenses say, well, we're going to keep playing big ball a little bit more if you're going to take away the deep game to the level that you did. And Atlanta's well suited to ride that trend right now.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, who's the sort of player that you look at in this draft class that you would be like, that's a great pick for the Falcons to be a nice combination and complement Tyler Allgeier's skill set?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't think the Falcons are going to go anywhere remotely to running back as early as, but if Jahmyr Gibbs was, for some reason, someone was the apple of their eye, I can understand that, because you can be a little more versatile with him and you can use him as a complement to Allgeier, and, quick-footed. I don't see the Alvin Kamara comparisons. You guys seen Alvin Kamara enough who listening here to know that Alvin Kamara has unbelievable contact balance, and Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't have that. He's more of a Charlie Garner type, which is a really good back, and he's aspirational Marshall Faulk, but he's never going to get to Marshall Faulk status, if you ask me. Like, quick, can catch, has to get a little better at routes. Alabama took him off the field on certain routes that you would think, okay, if you're that good of a receiver, we're going to keep you in on. A guy who I think you could probably get a little later is Tyjae Spears out of Tulane. People are going to be scared of the 2 ACL tears, but when you watch how good he is, even with the 2 ACL tears, and you think about Frank Gore and him coming to the league with 2 ACL tears, and there were football fans everywhere who like their young running backs wishing Frank Gore would finally retire, because he was the standard setter for coaches to show tape about what a running back does. Tyjae Spears is dynamic. He is, he has the burst. He has the cutting ability. He's a terrific open field runner. He's one of the best open field runners two best open field runners in this class. And along with Cordero Patterson, you'd have 2 of the better open field runners in the NFL on your team. With Spears, he's also a pretty good receiver. He reminds me kind of Jamal Charles, because he knows how to use his speed to dictate basically a chain of action against interior defenders to win inside, even though he's not the biggest back. And so I like him. Zach Evans, you can get later. Zach Evans out of Ole Miss, transferred from TCU. Look, I love this kid's game. A lot of people are down on him because he had a turf toe injury, and they think Kendre Miller took his job, which Kendre Miller's a very good back, but he didn't. If you really look at it closely, Evans had more carries, dominated on touches. He just got hurt, and then Miller had a nice season. And Evans left because he wanted a good NIL deal, and he ended up going. It's not like he went to Central Arkansas. He went to Ole Miss. It wasn't a step back, and he just wound up on a team that happened to recruit one of the 2 best freshman running backs in the nation. So it's kind of like Terrell Davis going, back when I was a student at the University of Georgia and covering the football team, Terrell Davis leaving from one program where he was really good under George Allen, the legendary coach. Then it was a defunct program, so he moved in, and he ended up on the same team with Garrison Hurst, and you would have thought that, people were down on Davis because they thought he got hurt too much, Well, it's kind of a similar thing with Zach Evans. When you watch Zach Evans' TCU tape, very creative back, very smart back, efficient, has the speed you're looking for, a lot of good tackle breaking, contact balance metrics with him. He knows how to get skinny, how to get compact, how to keep his pads and his hips aligned. He's a competent pass catcher on checkdowns, and he could be a lead back or a bell cow back in the NFL. if he needed to be, if you wanted him to be that. He reminds me of guys like Dalvin Cook and Clinton Portis, in the sense he can cut more like Clinton Portis, but he can have that curvy linear speed and movement to bend around people like Cook. And again, both can run between the tackles at a smaller size than you would expect and hold up. And I think Evans is that guy. And people remember him for this whole quixotic recruiting journey. This kid had a 3.7 GPA as a freshman at TCU. He's always been known as a good kid. He got suspended because he didn't want to give up his cell phone during the championship game in his high school. And that was a requirement. He didn't want to do it. Well, maybe that's an immature decision, but I think of my kids, they probably would have, a lot of people's kids would have done that. And when you consider the fact that his grandfather was really like the biggest influence and from parental type of influence in his life, and his grandfather died the year before him taking on his recruiting, and his parents, I don't know enough about his parents, but the way it's characterized, I would summarize it as that maybe his parents were in a position to provide that level of guidance, and Zach decided to take it on his own. So a lot of this is smoke character-wise about him, but the NFL teams tend to have a wide range of how they actually, I don't know, how competently they look at things like this. So I could see him dropping to the 4th or 5th round and the Falcons getting a steal. Those are two guys that come off the board. David A-Chain might be fun if you want a work-done kind of aspirational player. He might be able to give you that. He's on the shorter side. I might prefer a guy like Sean Tucker, who people are a little bit down on, but his acceleration is some of the most notable I've seen on film this year. And he and Chase Brown are two guys that can give you that speed element, catch the ball reasonably well, good cutback runners. So they can run zone or gap. Brown's a little better on zone, if you ask me. Sean Tucker's a little better on gap. So it just depends on how you think you want to use either of those guys. So those are, 6 guys I think I mentioned right now that could fit.
Yeah. I thought I was going to have to ask follow-up questions. Like, are there some guys, that you you covered all your bases there, Matt, with that. So, a lot of good running backs, a lot of players that I like on that list as well. You mentioned some comps for Jahmyr Gibbs. The one I've been working with is Aaron Jones. What is
I like that.
Yeah, okay. All right.
I like that.
Get validation here.
Yeah.
Matt Waldman on that Aaron Jones comp. So that's all I needed. Those many running backs there, a lot of good players, certainly A-Chain, Tucker, certainly adding that speed element that I think is missing from the Falcons room and whatnot. And obviously Gibbs and Spears and all those guys also add that element as well. So all of those guys would be great compliments to Tyler Algier, more the grinder type of running back. And then you have that guy that can be, the lightning to the thunder sort of things. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's episode. And tomorrow on the podcast, we'll probably give you my final thoughts on the draft. Topics like, what's at stake with this Falcons draft pick, but it will also be a golden opportunity for you guys to send in your Qs to get some A's, and of course you can send those via Twitter at Locked On Falcons or Facebook at Locked On Falcons. You can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com. You can leave a comment here on Locked On Falcons YouTube channel, or you can hit us up in the Locked On Falcons Discord, a link in the description below. And guys, continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Shout out to all my everydayers that are making us your first listen every single day. And for your second listen, make sure you check out the Locked On NFL mock draft special. Has been running on the Locked On NFL feed and Locked On NFL draft feed. You can find it on YouTube, the breakdown of who everybody picked. If you missed the Falcons pick, I went with a defensive player, but I don't want to spoil it for those of you that haven't listened to that episode yet. So again, check out the Locked On NFL mock draft special, available across the various Locked On feeds on YouTube and elsewhere on your preferred podcast platform. So guys, check that out. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every